policies in front of us here. I know Mrs. James, you have some comments to make about these
Yes.
policies. If you want to take it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. I would. So the policy committee has been hard at work. The 4 policies that are listed there, 2 are brand new policies and 2 are rewrites, complete and total rewrites of an existing policy. We have a 5th policy on the agenda tonight, and that's in the action section. And fortunately, that wasn't a rewrite, so it wasn't. But there were still some issues in it, and we'll discuss it when we get to that item. I'd like to go through each of these because there's some board input I need, particularly on FC local, or the I shouldn't say the committee needs on FC local. We have a little bit of work to do still on that one. So I'll just introduce them, and then if I can get your feedback or comments, and of course, Mr. Rosenthal, if I leave something out, jump in there. So first up is CCA. This is one that came to the committee's attention because we realized that the provisions of the Bond Oversight Committee were not in policy. So we used the 2 resolutions that we have used the last 2 bond referendums, and we basically turned that into this policy. So that's the kind of the intro on that. So I guess, Mr. Riddy, if there's any discussion.
This is Tossan.
I thought it was good. Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
I didn't have any notes on that one.
Well, of course, the reason that we had to do this because if it's not in policy,
it doesn't exist.
and I was talking to somebody about a month ago, talking about the Bond Oversight Committee and whatnot, and I was looking through all the policies to see where it was so I could send it to him, and I realized it's not in there. So that's how this came about.
That's how you know when you're getting a frantic call from Mr. Rosenthal at 11:30 at night. Grail, call me, text me something. Grail, are you still awake? Grail. Like, what's the matter, Dave? Something matter with Joan? No. We found out a policy we need to write. Okay, I love you, Mr. Rosenthal. All right. Next up, EK local. This is a new policy. This has having to do with assessment, and we updated. We basically, this is brand new for us. So let me see what my talking points on this one were. Basically, the focus was about trying to have assessment be student-centered, and that we'd be moving in the direction of student-owned learning so that the assessment process happens, but it gives the students feedback right away and helps them to be owners of their own learning. And that was kind of the point of this one. So that's my introduction.
This is Tossan.
So I had 2 comments or suggestions. Thank you for working on this one because I think this is critically important to our local accountability and where we're moving in our assessments. My first one was on controlling bias. And I liked that you guys added the to make the efforts to control for gender or demographic bias when selecting assessment instruments. But I thought this might be a good place to refer back to our unbiased curriculum policy to make sure that we also control bias in the way certain questions might be worded. Because as Mr. Rosenthal and I have discussed before, when looking, and we've discussed in this boardroom, when looking at textbooks or things like that, sometimes we find bias in certain questions or the way certain things are worded. So it might be a good idea to include that as well in this, and it may just be like pointing back to our policy that says that that applies in this case as well, that we want our unbiased curriculum reflected in our assessment tools or assessment instruments. So that was my first one. And my second one was under special education. I definitely like where it says that the ARD committee must be accommodated, the accommodations and modifications must be included in the district assessments as they are in the IEP. And then you say state assessment decisions for SPED students require the ARD committee determination. I would suggest, while I completely favor ensuring that our special ed students are given the opportunity to take district assessments, I can tell you from experience that there are times when it's better if the ARD committee can make the decision of whether or not they're going to sit for the district assessment. Now, if it's modified appropriately, which is something we weren't doing before, then I think that's great, then they should. But I just know from experience that there are times when, Abby has a certain number of assessments, they're all given to her within her IEP, and then if she also has to be assessed with the district assessment and then also has to sit for STAR, then we just get into a lot of assessing, and we're assessing the same things over and over again. And so I might want to consider allowing the ARD committee to make the decision of whether or not the district assessment is necessary for the student.
So, go ahead.
I think somewhere in this policy, from what I remember reading it, it actually talks about limiting all these district assessments to a very specific, narrow time frame, right? Yeah. So we're not, the whole idea is not to be shutting down classrooms for a week in every single class, to do these 3-day district assessments.
Different for special ed students. I mean, even what is good for a typical student can many times be overwhelming for a SPED student. And lots of times we can say, and we've made this determination as an ARD committee before, Abby's got enough grades. We don't need to take that test. We don't need to take that assessment. She's got enough grades. She's tested and tested and tested. So
I heard that from somebody on the trail about a month ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I meant to talk to you, Charles, about that too.
So usually the ARD committee has a pretty good feel for what might be best for that student. So that would be my recommendation.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to clarify. I'm looking at the section that says special education. So as it reads, it's referring to shall be accommodated or modified. But what I hear you asking for is language that says may or may not even be administered based on the IEP and the ARD decision.
Right, because the next sentence says state assessment decisions for special education students required ARD committee determination. So we could just include,
Can we just eliminate the word state and say assessment decisions?
I would say state and district assessment decisions can be determined by the ARD committee. So I like that you have that it has to be modified, because if they determine that the student's going to take it, it should be modified. But I really think the bottom line is the ARD committee really needs to make the decision on how many assessments these kids are getting.
And I think that was what our intent was. So,
I would
Dr. Hill, do you have something you'd like to add to that?
I would agree that it might be.
It's not on.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. Just need a little
Overachiever.
accommodation there. I think that we could add in there that the ARD committee should make the determination regarding local assessments, and what we would typically make that determination is should the student take it as is? Do they need an accommodation? Do they need some kind of modified form, or should they not take it at all? Depending on, and that's typically part of the ARD process. It may not always happen for every assessment, but I think we could write the policy that way. Does that make sense?
Right, so state and local assessment is how we would refer it, because,
That and local.
yeah, then it can be whatever form that local assessment is.
Thank you guys for working on that.
Thank you for that.
So
All right.
I have one other comment on this, that I think, and maybe it does say it in here somewhere, but I want to make sure it stresses, and Stephanie, we've talked about this before, is that as we kind of get away from a lot of standard, standard evaluations and whatnot, with this whole student ownership of learning, especially the grading pilot type thing, we need to make sure that this stuff correlates with, the STAR test. And so I think there should be maybe some kind of statement in here, Grail, that has something to do with, since we're always going to be judged, likely to always be judged by the STAR, that we should have some kind of report that kind of measures, student success at this level with the state assessment, just to make sure that things are tracking. So, see if we can maybe fit that in here as well at some point over the week here.
And we thought we were having the week off, but we're not.
Well, that never happens.
Well, I can offer, I know that when we list assessments associated with diagnostic assessments, and as we shared with you when we shared some of our REN 360 data,
Right.
that there's a number of reports associated with that diagnostic assessment in reading and math that give us projections and a trajectory of progress if a kid is making the appropriate growth for them to be successful on an end-of-year STAR. So we do that assessment already gives us good data in terms of predictions
Right.
on how kids are performing.
Right, but I want to see the actual correlation between, okay, we got all these data, here's the STAR too. How do they correlate? I think that's important.
Yeah,
And it's not just, I think it's going to be important to parents, especially because, with the rollout of the grading pilot, there's still a lot of anxiety, right? They're like, well, I'm not really sure how my kid's doing. And so it provides some, not that the STAR is like some amazing test or anything, but it provides some kind of ground truth, at least to compare it to. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Yes, maybe?
So I think maybe we could fit a sentence in on page 3. There's a sentence about district learning assessments or formative assessment tools, and then there's a sentence about it talks about the state assessment and how it would be used. So we could maybe fit some language in there that would address that, or at the very end to say that the connection will be made or something along those lines, or results will be compared or reported or something to that effect.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else on that one? No?
We're good.
All right, the next one is FC local. So this one is really important, and there's a lot of things that the committee's really worked on this one. And let me say that as we worked on the rewrite, what our goal or intention is to do a couple of things. One is to set up an oversight committee, similar to the way we have a bond oversight committee. And the second was then to create a mechanized process that the policy would essentially take the data and produce the result of what the attendance boundary should look like. So I described it to administration as sort of a sausage machine. You put the stuff in, and out comes the sausage. In other words, making it an objective process. Now, Dave and I picked up a couple things that maybe we need to tweak a little bit of the language today, but generally, that's what we're going for, an objective process that produces the information or produces the recommendation, essentially. The oversight committee then would oversee to make sure that the administration was producing the recommendation along the lines of what the policy intends. We changed in the policy some of the communication parameters and put some specificity around a number of those, around the attendance boundaries, but also around the some of the student enrollment options. And to make this whole thing work, what the board needs to really look at right this minute is to make sure that the decision principles are properly ranked. Dave and I took a stab at it, but I really would like to get your feedback, and even if that feedback isn't tonight, if that feedback can go through the administration so that we can make sure we get that information and we can get a good draft that we can vote on next week would be our goal. But that's really the key thing. Just so you know, we wrote the policy like this, then we asked staff to look at data from the last couple of attendance boundary changes that we had implemented, and said, okay, if this policy was the mechanism and we put that data in, what would be the result? And the results proved out. So the recommendations proved out, I should say, to what the policy as it exists right now. But I just want to bring that to your attention, so because that's what this is about. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Mrs. Tossand, you have a comment about that?
Yeah, so I have several things on this one I just wanted to throw out for you guys to think about. I really like that you did away with the percent spread for utilization, because it got very confusing in the community. And what we intended with that is not what the community understood, as we saw in the last process. So thank you for doing that. I like that efficient utilization is between 80 and 100%. I had a couple questions in here about, should we be defining over and underutilization? And you guys may have deliberately not done that, I don't know, but we do use, like even in the next one, we use over, underutilized. So we might want to think about defining what's overutilized and what's underutilized. Now, I know 80 to 100 is efficient, so does that mean over 100 is overutilized, or do we have some flexibility there? So we don't have to discuss it now, but just for you guys to think about. I also, under the annual enrollment review portion, we talk about adequate educational opportunities. We talk about utilization of district facilities. The thing that came to mind for me, especially after talking about the Fort Settlement First Colony issue, is should we include utilization of like our transportation areas, because a lot of that sometimes becomes overutilized just because of the way kids have to get to school, maybe where the boundaries are. I don't know that that needs to be included. I don't have strong, but as I was thinking through it, I thought, well, that's one of the issues we talked a lot about. And sometimes we need to look at, how our kids, are they able to be picked up and dropped off efficiently? Under that same section, when we talked about alternative student enrollment options, include the following, and several things are listed there. Some things have board action required. Thoughts that came to mind: what about terminating a program? Should board action be required for this, as well as for moving programs? Now, I don't know that we've historically gotten board approval for that, but we talked about it quite a bit in the last process, and that we didn't want programs moved from Hightower. And so I don't know, should the board have input in that if we're the ones that ultimately have to vote on the boundaries, and we obviously have to take into consideration whether or not a program's going to be moved? I think if a program's going to be terminated, that's probably something that needs to be included in there for our consideration.
Can I ask staff a question about that real quick? Does anyone know if that program moving and program termination, is that addressed in another policy?
The program, yes, it is.
Okay.
I don't know about termination, but I know the program moving would be addressed in a different policy.
Okay, so maybe we can look up what that is, and Dave and I can check on that.
The other two things that I thought were important to consider, so I love how you have the committee makeup, and I think it's really important that we change how we're doing this. And I'll have to look at the principles. I didn't look at those just to see if the order is right, but I thought it might be helpful. I know you probably deliberately left staff out of it, and I know why, so that it's an independent committee, but many times school staff in a feeder that's going to be impacted may bring valuable information to the decision process. So I thought maybe we should think about including them in an advisory capacity, just to ensure that they're included, because I know many times the community perspective, the community can give feedback or think one thing will work, and then the staff within that school or that feeder can say, well, this is why that might not work. So I just want to make sure we don't lose that piece of it when we're putting the committee together. And then I really believe the last one, this is probably what I think is most important. I didn't see a step in the process for bringing the committee recommendation back to the board before it goes out and for the community meetings.
Yeah,
And
let me address that, because we talked about that for
Yeah,
about an
so
hour
to
today.
me, that is a huge piece
Yes,
of it, because
yes.
so many times it gets pushed out.
Right.
And they think it's from the board, and it's not really from the board, and then it comes back to us, and we're like, okay, yeah, we never would have done this
Yeah.
anyway, so.
So Grail and I talked about this for about an hour, okay, today. And it's one of the things that I'm hesitant about a little bit about the committee is that it says it's an oversight committee,
Right,
but it can be interpreted, in some of the wording, and we kind of addressed this on the phone, but we need to, kind of work on it a little more, that it's almost like an advisory committee.
yeah.
And to me, for those who were around, not that many in this room that were around in 2012 when we had the Buck Committee, okay? And that's not what we want, okay? Because what that is, I don't want to get too much into it, but it becomes an advisory committee, and then, if things are brought up to the board without any input, then if we don't agree with those, then we're told we're not listening to the community.
Right,
And so that's why exactly what you said is what we talked about. There's a step that it's kind of in there. I think we understand it to kind of be in there, but it's not clear. It's not clear enough. Okay.
well, and I almost think it needs, so this is my 2 cents on it, I almost feel like it needs to be twice. So in the beginning, you say it's presented to the board, and then the board can give feedback, that's great. Then after it kind of goes and gets in the sausage machine with the advisory committee or whatever we're calling them, maybe they need to come back and present to the board and get the board's feedback. Because I really believe what happens is our perspective is very, very different a lot of times than what the community perspective is. And there were things that were presented last time, we discussed in this room that I said, I can't vote for that. I can never vote for
Right.
that. And it's historically, I can't vote for that.
So I think that's kind of the point, that the administration is supposed to present to this committee things that, its recommendations and its rationale, okay, and why. So that, okay, we can't really put a whole bunch more kids in this school because, we're trying to work on the performance, the leadership, and so that's not something that we're going to consider. Okay, I'm getting into details from experience, but so that's kind of in there. It's just we just need to clean up that paragraph. So
about perhaps, what if it was sort of like a working type, what if we had a working meeting, like if they came to a workshop and did an informational where we have some back and forth, and it allows us to interact with them as a board in a public setting at the beginning of one of our workshops, and then we can give them, well, here's the why, and then they can, I don't know, maybe that's
Yeah.
the way to do it, but I just think that piece is critical, because we ultimately have to vote for it.
right, exactly, and that's why, to me, the main thing about if it's really an oversight committee, to me, it's the district is actually making a recommendation, okay, and we're presented it too, maybe like we did last time, maybe on individually or in pairs, so that we're not violating anything, and then basically this committee is supposed to look at the policy and look at other issues maybe surrounding the decision, and to make sure that it complies with the policy and whatnot. And again, it's giving oversight. It's making sure that there's something out there that we just didn't see, or there's an issue that it's going to create this or it's going to create that, and that just wasn't something that the administration saw or thought of, right, or board members thought of, but it's like, oh yeah, we didn't think about that. That we need to have that feedback. So that's kind of the way I envision that. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So, I'm just gonna, this is what I've got so far. Should we define over and underutilization? Should we put something in about roads or parking capacity or anything like that as far as part of our annual enrollment review conversation? We need to reference something about terminating or moving a program and put the policy where that's covered in there, and put that on the to-do list and if it needs to be done. On as membership of the Boundary Oversight Committee, possibly considering staff advice or principals as advisory members type of thing. And then recommendations to the board before they go to the community. And I think that's all of them. Did I cap them all?
Yeah, thank you for that. So do we think that we'll have that by next week, or do we need more time to work on that?
Let me check with my committee and
No
obviously.
pressures.
You know, we really wanted to bring this tonight to have this discussion.
Right.
Okay, it's too important to rush, and I'd rather have it a little more it has to be flushed out correctly before it comes back. So
Right.
if we can get it next week, great. If not,
Yeah.
then
We'll let you know.
next month.
Well, that's fine. Well, I asked that because I think that we talked about that. We wanted to make sure that we just had the conversation.
Exactly,
Right,
because
so
we needed input. Dave and I had done as much as we could, kind of just as we could in the last month. So that's kind of where we are.
Yeah.
But I would really like it if you have any input on the order of the decision principles. If everybody can take a look at those, because that's another important piece of it that makes it, we're committing to.
Right.
And we can always revise it if it doesn't work, and we can always go in a different direction if the policy produces a result that's not, that doesn't seem like the right thing. But ideally, there'll be less angst if the policy works as the mechanism. So.
On the decision principles, if you had feedback, you can give Beth or me an email or a phone call.
All right. Thank you, Grill.
Next up, because it's a never-ending effort here, is a new policy which we're excited about, and that is GK local. It's a rewrite, but it's more than a rewrite. It's really a kind of a whole new concept. This is our second theory of action to sort of inform the administration as to how we want them to proceed in this area. So this is an attempt to target really goal 4 of our board goals, and it's around collaborative communities. And it talks about how we will be informed and how the community will be informed. The second part is about consent and how that'll go forward. But the part Dave and I love the most is the last, at the very end, tying it all to an evaluation and to student outcomes, and making sure that the arrangements, the agreements, the plans, the collaboration produces results, so that we're using our energy in a productive and strategic way. Rather than random acts of kindness, we want strategic intent and priority about doing what will help our kids to be the very best people that they can be, and to achieve the most in our school district while they're with us. So that's the intent around that, and I would love your feedback.
Mrs. Tossan?
I thought this one was really well done, so I just wanted to say that first of all. And my only feedback is that we might want to consider including a statement about partnering with our local, state, and federal governments, governmental agencies, or in the collaborative community world, because we've talked about that in the past, and we have our joint board meetings with our city councils, and I just think it's important to make the effort to be collaborative with them. So just a statement about that. I thought it was well done. Thank you, guys.
Mr. Rosenthal?
So I just want to reiterate what Grail said, maybe in a little different way. So, to me, a lot of this a lot of the thinking on this came from our board self-evaluation a few weeks ago. And, you know, we have this as a board, one of our 4 board goals, so it's a big deal, right? But when you think about, you know, we always talk about collaborative communities and whatnot and partnerships, and yet it seems kind of random at some point, you know? Like, who are we partnering with? Is it working? What's the goal? How is it working? And so I think, again, like Grail said, that it's that last piece that we need to see, the board needs to see it, a report at least annually, in order to know what our efforts, because we spend money on this stuff. You know, I'm sure, I know a lot of it's, you know, through volunteerism and whatnot in the community, but if it's not working, then somebody's coordinating this stuff, and so their time's being wasted, and you know, so we need to be clear, and the board needs to see evidence that the effort is efficient and it's producing results. And so I think, you know, to me, at least an annual report is a goal, and that's something that we will use to evaluate the superintendent, since that is one of his board goals.
So a partnership is obviously 2 parties. So is there any way, and this is something I think about last night, is there any way that we can hold the other party accountable?
Yes, so we discussed this in great length, because obviously we can't, we wouldn't want, and our superintendent would never want to make arrangements or collaboration with outside entities and then be responsible for for those entities' results. That can't work.
Right.
And that's why this evaluation piece is in there. So this gives him, in this case, the opportunity to evaluate these and report back. And if the entity is not performing, then terminates the agreement, and he's reporting that to the board on an annual basis. So we can, you know, he can say, I entered into agreement with XYZ group, but nothing happened. They never showed up. They didn't do what they promised. They failed, you know, to do this. They said they were going to do this, but they wanted to do this instead when they showed up, and so it didn't work out. And that's part of the report back and the evaluation. Does that make sense?
No,
Jason?
it makes perfect sense. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and we spent that goes back like 6 months ago when we first started talking about that, because we've had some conversations with some folks in the community, and I kept thinking that, well, that sounds great, but if I'm the CEO of a company and somebody just presents an idea and I say, yeah, go ahead, it's got my name on it, but how do I hold these folks accountable? You know, so if it's a flop or there's actual harm that happens toward the district as a result, it's got my name on it, you know? Right. And so if I'm the CEO, I'm not going to sign off on that unless there's some kind of joint responsibility expressed. So, you know, we need to make sure that is actually still captured in here. I mean, I think it is, like the way you explained it, but we need to make sure that's really what the words say. As I was listening to you explain it, it's like, yeah, that's it. You nailed it. I just want to make sure that's what the words say, though.
Okay, well, I think that's good, and part of that, of course, comes back to legal and the memorandum of understanding that gets written in the first place, and that the superintendent has an out in it, that if the, you know, responsibilities aren't being accomplished, then the agreement can end. because absolutely that's how it has to work. That's the only way it's gonna work. So I guess if, Dr. Dupree, if you feel like there's additional language we need to put in the policy to protect you, then I think we're expressing that we're open to that, so just review.
Yeah, listen to the conversation. I just was jotting down a note, maybe at the very last, it ends with annually the superintendent shall report the success rate and effectiveness of all partnerships, as well as recommendation or plans to continue or discontinue, or something like that.
Just adding a sentence to clarify that that's what
Just to kind of
the
wrap it
purpose
up.
would be. Yeah, I think that's great.
Good deal. Thank you for your hard work. Looks like we're done with our policies until later on the agenda. Thank you to the policy committee once again for all your hard work. Moving along, review proposed 2019 maintenance and operations tax rate. Mr. Bassett, did you want to make a comment about that, or?
Well,
Not that
yeah,
it's
it's
necessary.
really just to follow up on our conversation before. So this would be at the $1.17. If that would be an 11 penny increase as we discussed. This is what the agenda item looks like.
All right. Thank you very much. Mrs. James?
I guess I just have a comment. I kind of brought this up before, but I think, Dr. Dupree, this would be, maybe not to answer tonight, but this is what's on my mind is, so we have an 11-cent increase, we have all this program expansion. What's kind of the timeline, what kind of expectation, not that we can really plan that out, but I guess I'm just trying to be realistic about how the money and what our obligation with the money and spending it versus the organizational capacity and ability to do new things and get new things online.
We are actually planning that out right now, because that's one of the issues, as you know, we've dealt with, is too much, too fast. And so what we are doing is the staff has done a great job over the last several weeks of really beginning to lay out in detail the next 5 year, I guess it's a 4 to 5 year window with milestones that kind of show the timing of the work. So give a good visual of what that should look like. So we're not overstressing staff.
I think at the right time, that would be good for the board to hear and to understand.
Yes, that is our intention.
Mr. Rice?
Thank you, Mrs. James. I think that's an excellent question. So, Dr. Dupree, when would you be bringing the plan to the board?
It'll probably be, I think it'll be in a pretty solid draft by June, mid-June or so. Our goal is to really be able to bring it to the board. We're actually going to just do a preliminary look at it with the Vision and Planning Committee this Friday. And then we want to be able to bring it to the board in time that we can get the superintendent evaluation document approved much sooner than we typically do. It's usually in November or December. We'd like to get it all wrapped up and done so the board can approve all of it by August or early September at the latest.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. Thank you, Dr. Dupree. Moving on to 6A4, review setting the date, time, and place to conduct a public budget meeting for the proposed 1920 school district budget and tax rates on June 10th, 2019.
Yes, so that item, whenever we put it together, we originally thought we were going to be able to do it in consecutive meetings, but because of the requirements, we need to have 10 days between, and so the 10th won't do it for us. We need to actually have it on the 3rd, and so we'll make
Okay.
sure that that's adjusted in here. The one thing though that you skipped over on the debt side was the 28 pennies. That would be the increase of the 2 pennies, for the to support bond 2018. And so, that is something that we need and would be included in the adoption of the rate.
Mrs. Tossan, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I just wanted to make a comment on the number 4 about the date, time, and place. So we're looking at June 3rd for that date, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I will be out of town, but I can Skype into that meeting,
Okay.
and I think it's still okay. I'll get Mr. Morris to confirm, but I think it's still okay for me to Skype in for that type of hearing so that I can be present and vote and be part of that. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
He's shaking his head yes, so. Mrs. James.
And I would just follow along with that, is it'd be really important to get it on our calendars if we're really gonna do that date, so we don't get other stuff on there.
Agreed. Moving along, 6A5, review of the previous meeting minutes, March 4th, 2019, March 25th, 2019. We good, Grill? All right. Thank you for your work. Moving on to 6B1, review contract for teacher recruitment services. Any comments? 6B2, review locally developed social studies standard related to local history associated with the Sugarland 95 and convict leasing. Good stuff. Thank you for your work on that. It's very good. 6B3, review the expansion of EDGE stipends at additional campuses. Mrs. James.
Thank you, Mr. Radine. I guess my question is around this is, we want to expand the program, so what have the results been at Briargate and Ridgemont in terms of our student achievement? That would be the first thing that I'd like to know.
So I can speak to that. So after the first year of EDGE implementation at Briargate, they met standard. And after the second year of EDGE implementation at Briargate, they met standard again and had 3 distinctions. So it's worked well for Briargate, and they've continued on. Also, it's been nice to see that even with a principal change mid-year at Briargate, the stability in the staff and the talent there have really helped the campus weather that and continue on. They've had a very good spring semester with their new principal. The other campus that received the EDGE model is Ridgemont. And so after the first year, they did not meet standard, but they had growth. And after the second year of being in the EDGE model, they did meet standard. And so both the campuses that had been IR for a number of consecutive years that resulted in them becoming an EDGE campus are both have met standard now. And all the data points do project them continuing to meet standard this year as well.
Thanks. Do you think you could, at some point this week, put some numbers, like I'm visualizing a graph of what our trajectory is sort of at those campuses in terms of the, what you're saying, that we've started low and we've met standard and we've improved? I guess I'd
Absolutely.
just like to see the,
Okay, we can do that, absolutely.
the straight line graph model. I learned that in my board self-evaluation.
Mr. Rosenthal.
And then, Dr. I, does that include any of the star results for this spring?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we actually have a 3-year projection, or not projection, the actual results. And so numbers, for instance, we have the cohort because this is the 3rd year of EDGE. So the first year of EDGE, 3rd graders were, of course, tested. And now last year there were 4th graders. This year they're 5th graders. And results are very encouraging, anywhere from a plus 16, plus 21%
Wow.
growth over those 3 years. And so those are the kids that have had the most time with EDGE that have been STAR tested.
I think we should highlight that. I really do.
Well, having really strong teachers makes an incredible difference.
But people, especially now that we're, talking about, I mean, this goes to part of that messaging, a nice little graph, I mean, as long as that data is real, then.
Yeah, really simple and really visual is what I'm looking for.
Mrs. Tossian.
And now that we're going to have the TRE, as you say, the really strong teachers are what have made the difference, and we have to pay those really strong teachers. And we have to pay them to stay. So I think that's going to be critically important as we get ready for this upcoming TRE.
We're absolutely right. I mean, the pay, aside from the stipend, is the same at all schools. And so for many teachers, sometimes it's a less taxing lift working at this school. Why would I come to this campus? So it's a little bit harder for them to recruit. So not only does it attract interest, it then helps retain them, because if they were to leave the campus, the stipend does not follow them. So there's a kind of a twofold key benefit of attracting more talent to apply to the campus in interest, and then, of course, retaining them as well. And, of course, some other benefits are that there's a lot of leadership training that the staff, that those teachers receive.
Right.
And then there's a lot of promotions as a result. We're building their capacity. So, for example, the lead master teacher at Briargate is now the assistant principal at Briargate. So there's other examples as well. But
It's all about the people. So I'd love to see how else we can compensate them or reward them even outside of financial. I mean, I don't know. I know we've done some things before at the campuses, but I would love to know what they need or what they would like, because that growth is huge, and that's a group of teachers that has really made a huge impact on students, and they need to be recognized for that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. Mrs. James?
Yeah, so I would agree with what Mrs. Tossan is saying, and also what Mr. Rosenthal said about highlighting and valuing and rewarding. So I would also say, just in reading some of the information this week, there's been we're doing some components, we're doing this, we're that, and I'm not really clear on which campuses were doing which components of EDGE. And I know this request is for EDGE stipends, so I'm thinking that some components are going to be done at these campuses. And I guess, and that's fine, I'm sure you guys have worked it all out. I'm curious to what they are, but I can let that go. But I wondered have we done a program evaluation? Have we done any sort of third-party set of eyes or whatever, except for the test results on the knowing the kids' test results?
So we have information from the second year of implementation, which was 17-18. Y'all know it launched in 16-17. And in 17-18, we worked with Hanover to conduct a program evaluation, and we have feedback from teachers, parents, staff, and then the report that was provided by Hanover. And now that we're moving into or completing year 3 of implementation, that'll be part of what our program evaluation committee talks about this year as they bring forward the programs for recommendation for evaluation through that 3 to 5 year cycle.
All right. Before you go, Dr. I want to ask a question. You mentioned those numbers, but what's the approximate mobility rate at, let's say, Ridgemont Elementary?
that's a good question. I hate to throw a random number out there, but there is considerable movement at the school from students that are withdrawing, students that are enrolling. So there's definitely a high degree of mobility, but the talent we've been able to bring in and the systems we've put in place has really helped the campus adapt and be more nimble. So as new students come in, they're able to more quickly adapt to what the expectations are at the EDGE campus and continue moving the kids forward, no matter where they may have been taught up through 4th grade. They show up in 5th grade, and we're still getting ready for success and ready for middle school.
I think that's a huge part of the story that's often untold. It's not just numbers, but just what you said, that that's huge. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Are we good? Moving on to 6B 4A. Let me see.
Excuse me, Mr. Burdine. Can
Yes,
I
ma'am.
ask one other thing? I have a question if we're related to the EDGE. If we could also get information about the money that we've spent on it, the investment, so that we can understand how that compares year over year, and then understanding what that means going forward in terms of our budgeting and financial impact. Because that might be another piece of the story to tell when we're selling this.
Thank you for that. 6B 4A, Professional Consulting Services, Academic Affairs. Moving along, 6B 4B, Supplemental Instructional Resources for K-12, ELA, Math, Science, Social Studies, World Languages, Health, Physical Education, STEM, Coding, and Robotics. 6B 4C, Online Video Creation and Editing Application. 6C1, review new staff positions, stipends, and compensation adjustments to support campuses and district infrastructure. This is probably some information that's a continuation of what was before, right, in the evening.
Just a little bit more detail, but yes.
Right. All right. 6C2, review of an interlocal agreement with the Blanco County for a police department records management system and annual maintenance and support. All right. 6C3, review low attendance waivers and missed instructional day waivers. 6C4, review Texas Education Agency alternative approvers for Teal login accounts. Moving along to 6C5A, Special Education Department Specialized Student Information Management System. This is for our purchases exceeding $50,000. Moving along, 6C5B, Child Nutrition Software. All right, 6C5C, Property, Terrorism, and Equipment Breakdown Insurance. I'm sorry, Mr. Bassett, I didn't read this specifically, but is this something we've always had, or is this something that we're adding?
Oh, we've always had this kind of coverage.
Okay. All right. 6.5D, Planning and Budgeting Cloud Services. All right. 6.5E, National Incident-Based Reporting System, Complaint Records Management System for the Police Department. All right. Next are audience responses to agenda items, which we do not have any this evening. So we will now move to our action item. Mrs. Taussand.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. I move that the Board of Trustees approve proposed revisions to local policy EIC local as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Taussand and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have any discussion, Mrs. James?
Yes, so thank you. This is the last policy that the board was working on. It was primary, it says rewrite at the top. I'm not sure that it was a complete rewrite, but there were some passages rewritten. The two things that it was mainly addressing is the way we do some of our GPA calculations when students, so when we move it out of a numeric number and into a GPA for NCAA and things like that, that was changed. Also changing the weighting of the dual credit to be the same as the AP classes. And then the second thing was allowing students in special education who have IEPs to be recognized in the as honor graduates, and this is based on their completion of the coursework required for an endorsement according to their IEP. So thought that was a good change that was more inclusive of students. Something that we discussed as a committee, but we did not include in this policy, was considering moving forward in the future with modifying our class rank and kind of de-emphasizing and de-stressing the possibly de-stressing students by de-emphasizing ranking students against one another or so often doing that. And we talked about how the board has been wanting to emphasize maybe completion of endorsements, completion of or work towards the attributes of a profile of a graduate, and emphasizing those things a little bit more than a GPA kind of ranking. And one of the reasons that this came up was because we were talking about endorsements, and some of the endorsements are full of classes that are weighted, and you can get AP classes and things like that. And some of the endorsements, example, say fine arts, you wouldn't necessarily get weight for a number of those classes in that. And so those students who pursued that endorsement would already be behind in terms of any kind of class rank. So our idea was to sort of de-emphasize that. So feel free to share your input on that, but that is not included in this policy, but that's a future consideration the policy committee asked the administration to explore.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Tossan, do you have a comment?
Yes. So first of all, I want to thank Mr. James, Mrs. James, and Mr. Rosenthal for getting on this so quickly and getting this to us for action tonight. Part of the reason that that it came to our attention that the special ed part of this policy needed to be updated is because my daughter, who should be an honor graduate, was not an honor graduate. So she met all of the requirements. She's a National Honor Society. She should be graduating magna cum laude. And imagine my surprise when all the rankings came out and my daughter was not listed. So in my mind, this is something that slipped through the cracks on us because I as upset as I was for her, I was just as upset over the 5 years I've sat on this board and had no idea this was happening. So I'm really appreciative of you guys working on it and getting it done so quickly, not only so that my daughter, but so that other students in Fort Bend ISD can graduate with honors as they should and be recognized as they should. So I want to thank y'all for that. And, you know, they should be. So I guess to your other point about de-emphasizing rankings, so I have another daughter who does the fine arts endorsement, right? And so she struggles with rankings because she doesn't get credit. When I was in school, if you were in the honors band or if you were in the wind ensemble, then you got honors credit because you worked to be in the top band and you got credit for being in the top band. And personally, I think they should. I think they should get credit because the amount of hours that they rehearse and that they do things outside of school. Even at the middle school level, I was having a conversation with the principal about the number of hours these kids spend performing outside of school, at events or at concerts or at UIL. And so I really believe that as a district, we need to consider giving these students that credit, that kind of credit for being in the varsity in the varsity fine arts programs and these other programs, because it's just as important, and we've said that it's just as important. So that's my 2 cents on that. I kind of feel like it should be both, because there are students who are academically driven and they are in those classes and they put in a lot of time and a lot of effort, and they should be recognized for that. Their ranking is important to them. So for me, Abby's ranking was important. I mean, she worked really hard for that. The fact that her curriculum was modified is irrelevant. She worked just as hard as any other student because that was hard for her. But then again, you know, acknowledging and recognizing these endorsements that don't get that credit. I mean, maybe the answer is to give them I don't know what the state law is on all of that, but I don't know if we can do that. But yeah, I think it should be a mixture of both, because I think all students should be recognized for the things they put their time into. The one comment I would make on the policy is where it says, students served under special education who meet all coursework and requirements of the distinguished level of achievement under the foundation program or the foundation program with endorsement. And I brought this up to Dr. Dupree today that we may want to add some, I don't know, maybe Rick can help me with this, or Rob. I don't know if Rob's still here. But it says, or the foundation program with endorsement. Endorsement is a legal term under House Bill 5. And technically,